prepare for bombardment. Today we're painting the Sanctum Administratus for Warhammer 40,000. So take back the city and let's do some hobby. So, with the release of the latest season of Warhammer 40,000's chapter approved mission deck and the associated tournament companion that's available for download on the Warhammer community website, I thought I'd take another look at building a table's worth of terrain that is not only good looking and is thematic, but is also functional and can be used with the terrain layouts that they recommend in the tournament companion. Now, for those who aren't aware, the tournament companion basically sets out a guide for running a tournament, and there are some additional rules and some erratas on cards. There's recommendations on how to judge your players and how to rank them, and there's also recommended terrain layouts. Now, these layouts are basically mirrored layouts, and they're designed to be as fair and balanced as possible. So not giving a massive advantage to melee armies or either giving a advantage to ranged armies, which can often be the case when you are just making up your own terrain layouts. Often it skews towards being a bit light on terrain, and that can really give an advantage to armies that have a lot of long-range firepower as opposed to armies that are more melee based. So for a tournament environment where you want everything to be as even and balanced as possible, or also just for a pickup game, especially against someone you don't really know that well at the local club or something like that, you don't really want to have terrain play too much of a unbalancing role in your games. You want it to be there to be used, and so you can take advantage of tactics and skill. Otherwise, if there's not enough, you just shoot the other player, and whoever's got the most guns wins. Or if there's too much, you might not be able to get the shots, and a player with lots of infantry melee, for example, would have the advantage there. So I think they're a good thing to have, a good tool, so you don't have to think about the terrain setup too much, and it gives both players an even chance, and it really should come down to the list building and the skill of the players rather than the terrain layout. So having said that, Games Workshop actually don't really make a lot of terrain sets that can be used with the terrain layouts that they recommend in the tournament companion. They have one box, which is the Killzone Vulcus, and that's about the closest thing. It has a lot of L-shaped ruins, and I actually made a video where I modified the big square ruins that they have there in a way that makes it a bit more compatible with the standard tournament terrain layouts. I also did some videos with the Nakmun box, so with a bit of converting, again, you can make that so it's more suitable for those tournament companion terrain layouts. But there is one box of terrain that Games Workshop sells, and they've sold it for quite a long time. It came out in 9th edition, and it's basically always available on their web store, and it's this one here, the Sanctum Administratus. Now, when you look at it on the back of the box, it doesn't look really all that suitable for tournament play. It's just a big giant square, but it's actually modular, so it's made out of a bunch of different wall sections, and they can be put together pretty much any way you want. So that's what we're going to do today, is make a whole table out of just the Sanctum Administratus box. So here we have the Sanctum Administratus box, and inside you get some instructions, which we're mostly going to ignore. And there's two types of sprues. One has the floor type section, and then the other ones have the wall sections. So we're going to start with the wall sprue. So just get your hobby clippers out and clip all the pieces off. I start off with the big wall sections. Each one of those is essentially two parts. The column that runs on one side comes in two pieces. So just clip all the little pieces of sprue off those. and there's also a piece of sprue in the window of the ones that have windows that are open. Now I get my cut-proof glove and a bluntish knife, and I go through and clean up all the little sticky out connector parts and the mold lines. So just be patient. I know some people wouldn't bother with terrain, but I always make an effort to get all of the mold lines off and then use a brush to clean them up. And once that's done, you can get to gluing. So I use Citadel plastic glue for terrain. So just put it on all of the surfaces on one side and then make sure the column's the right way around, and it just slots in nicely. Hold it firmly until it sticks, and just going to go and repeat the process with all of the wall sections that have a column, because they are all pretty much the same, so it's just nice and easy to just do them all at the same time. So once that's done, you can see how these slot together, and they basically slot into the grooves of the column. So you can either make a right angle or a straight piece, and then these broken end pieces also slot into the columns. So these are about 2.5 inches, or a bit more than 2.5 inches each. So putting a few of them together comes up with basically the perfect length that's needed for the Tournament Companion recommended terrain layouts. So we're just going to glue a bunch of pieces together like that until they are firm. So I'm just going to keep combining these until I get the shapes that I want. So in this case, I'm making the U-shaped ruin. So you can see that takes 5 of the large walls and 2 of the smaller end pieces. I'm also making a bunch of L-shaped ruins. I also made a smaller, more of a square L for the middle, smaller terrain pieces. So all in all, I'm making a combination of left side L shapes and right side L shape. Now, because there was only a certain number of end pieces, I decided to make some of my own out of the larger wall pieces. So essentially, I just started clipping away at one of the sides of these and just like hacking and using pliers and knives to just rough up the end and make it look like it's been blasted away. I had to get the big pliers to remove that part, and just creating like a battle damaged edge on it, and leaving some of the parts there like that beam, cutting away part of the window and bending it just to make it look like it's battle damaged and it doesn't have just a clean break off. So that's what it looks like. I'm pretty happy with that. And then I also decided to do the same but with the other side, the column side of a piece. So I got my razor saw out and just hacked away for a bit and pulled away part of the column. It was a bit tough, but I got there, and then just cleaned up the base of the column that remains. Again, did some battle damage on the windowsill, and I got one of the little rubble column ends and glued it to the end there. So I think that also looks quite nice. So the next section is the second story floors, the ruined floors. So there's a number of different pieces that you can just combine, and they also have these little cog things which go on top of the pillars to fill them in. There are some support struts, and you actually have to cut the skull part away from them to get it to fit underneath the floors if you're not using it as an end piece. And then there's also a couple of the ruin pieces that I just wanted to make a bit smaller, so I just cut some extra parts away from those just so it would fit the roof layouts that I was looking to go for. So you just combine those all, and you can use those support struts with a little lighting thing to just give the roof a bit more strength, and just continue to add pieces together, gluing them all as you go, and you get a nice little ruined roof that's been blasted away. You can use these little parts to complete any gaps. The last part is the second story ruined walls. Now you can make these multiple stories, but I was just trying to maximize the number of ruins per box. So I didn't give it any of these a second story, but I did want a little bit of cover so it looks a bit more natural. So just used a bunch of these pieces. I just busted up this one a little bit with a knife because I didn't have a smaller end piece to use, so it just looks a bit natural that way. So that's the piece all done. So my U-shaped ruins, and then I've got my left-sided L-shaped ruins, my little square one for a smaller terrain piece, and then I've got another left-sided ruin, and I have some right-sided ruins as well. So that's all ready to start painting. So we're going to start off by spraying everything in black, Chaos Black. You can use a cheaper black if you want, but this just is the best black in my opinion. And for some of them, I'm going to actually paint them red. So I'm going to go pass over with Mephiston red, not doing a full solid coat, just doing it a bit streaky so there's some black left underneath visible. So I'm going to now take some Wild Rider red, and I'm going to sort of heavily dry brush the Mephiston red ones, just making sure especially that I'm catching the edges of the cracks and the tops of the columns. So it looks like that, a bit messy, but it looks good, it gives it texture. And then I'm going to use for the other ruins, Mechanicus Standard Grey and Dawnstone. And this is the same method I used to paint my Vulcus terrain. So if you've seen that video, it's exactly the same, kind of stippling on the Mechanicus Standard Grey. So I'm going to do that for the walls and also for the floor sections, because I think that gives good texture, leave a little bit of black showing underneath in parts. Then I'm going to use Dawnstone to do the same thing, just to give it even more texture and make it look like it's sort of crumbling concrete or something like that. So that's what the grey ruin looks like once I've done those passes over with the stippling effect. I'm going to take a Baden black and I'm just going to paint over the floor sections of the red ruins because I want to paint those in grey just to give a bit of a differentiation in colour so the whole thing's not red. I think it'd be just a bit too much. So I'm going to use the same technique as the grey walls, just stippling on the Mechanicus Standard Grey and the Dawnstone, and that's what it looks like once it's done. But now here's the most time consuming part. I now have to go over all of the parts that I don't want to paint red and paint them in black. It takes a long time, but the red just shows through otherwise. So the next color we're going to do is Balthazar Gold. I'm going to use that on most of the support beams, the larger pieces of metal that run all around this structure. So just go around and fill in all of those, and also on the roof and around the edges of the windows and things like that. So it looks nice over the black that we painted over before. So that's what it looks like with all the Balthazar Gold pieces that I want. Next is Lead Belcher. So basically most of the rest of the metal pieces I'm going to do in Lead Belcher. So the metal sheeting underneath the wall, all the little gizmos and vents and things like that can all be Lead Belcher. And the little rivets and everything as well, just go and pick those all out. It doesn't take too long, even though that there's a lot of them, as well as the rebar underneath the floor. So that's what it looks like once the Lead Belcher's on. Next is Retributor Armor. So there's these big Mechanicus glyphs that are on each of the window sections, so just going to do that, as well as the framing of the light fixtures. So there's a bunch of little lights everywhere, and then these little shrine, Vox shrine kind of things as well can be in the Retributor Armor. And finally for metals is Screaming Bell, just to pick out some of the cabling and the little engine things on the fan. So next we're going to use a variety of bright colors to add details. First one is Mephiston Red. So I'm going to use that to paint all the little glowing eyes and some of the buttons that are all over this model, the Mechanicus eyes. Also the gauges, like the needles and switches and things like that, that I just want to have a bit of a pop of color on those. I'm going to do that with some other colors. So green, some of the other buttons are going to be in green, and some of the cables. I'm going to do this the same with blue and yellow. I know a lot of people don't bother with any of the cablings, but I think it really adds that extra level of detail, and it doesn't really take that long to just go around for a few minutes with each color and just pick them out. It really just adds just a lot more life to your model than if they're not painted. Next I'm going to use a black and white, so a Baden black, to do some of the non-electrical cabling, or the ones that I don't want to be colored. Also going to paint some of the electrical boxes in black too, just so everything's not metal, and then the consoles and things as well. And then for white I use Wraithbone, and I just paint all of the skulls. There's a bunch of little skulls, being a Warhammer model, and half of the Mechanicus symbol in white as well. And yeah, there's lots of little skulls that are along the top of the first floor. So this is what it looks like, ready for shading. So I think it looks great, but it could really use some griming up. So to do that we use Agrax Earth Shade. So I'm going to thin it down because I don't want it overly grimy. So about half mix with water. And I just take a big shade brush and just go to town, just lay it on pretty thick and make sure that you're getting into all the crevices, every surface. For the vertical surfaces, it's best to sort of go generally in a top-down direction to simulate somewhat the effects of grime sort of running down from top to bottom, and make sure you get every part, the roofs as well. And once that's all down, looks like that. Looks a lot more battle damaged than that bright color that it was before. So lastly, for the models, we're going to do the lighting. So I'm going to start off by painting any areas that have lights in Wraithbone. Now, it's probably very unlikely that there's actually power, but I just like to have a bit of a pop of a color on the models as much as possible. So for the lights, I'm going to use Iandin Yellow and just really thickly saturate that on, so it gives that sort of dull glowing effect once it's dried. So Iandin Yellow for the lights, and then for little consoles I use Dark Angels Green. So again, just very thickly put that in, and it will give some natural variation. So once the lighting's done, my pieces look like that, and they look pretty good for now. But I wanted to paint some hazard stripes on some of the doors, so I got some Wraithbone and re-undercoated the panels from black to white. You might need to do a few coats. And then I made a little guide out of some card, and the idea of that is it pops into these little panels and gives me a guide for a straight line, because hazard stripes are very hard to get consistent thickness lines. So I think this guide really helps, and it was a bit iffy first. As I was going through, I got better at it. Basically, I cut a little hole in it so I could move it from panel to panel, and as I did this on more and more doors, I realized that you just do a very thin guide line. Don't try to do too thickly, because it will look messy like that. And then it just flips around to the other side to get lines evenly on the other side. Now, some of the parts there I couldn't put the guide in, so I just had to hand draw the lines, but they're very small and they're less noticeable. And then I just thickened the lines to connect the upper line to the lower one. So just go through and do all that, and then get some white and clean up all the messiness. Yeah, some of the spillage was pretty bad on those first ones. And then use some Nazdrag yellow to paint in the white parts. You don't really need to worry about getting it over the black because the yellow doesn't show through on the black very well at all. So once I fill in all of the white with Nazdrag yellow, it will look something like this. So it looks pretty good, especially from tabletop. It might be a little bit funny close up. And then I just paint over the rest of it. So I'm pretty happy with how those hazard lines turned out. So the last bit of painting we're going to do is just to do a bit of a highlight over the agrax. So I'm going to use Dawnstone on any of the grey parts. In my Volcus terrain I used grey Sear, but I just wanted these to be a little bit darker. So bit of Dawnstone, just making sure you're hitting the edges and the cracks, and also the floor sections for the red terrain pieces as well. And for the red, I'm going to use Wild White Rider Red. Just do it quickly and roughly, and that's fine. And then lastly, I'm going to use some matte varnish to protect these. So 2 layers of matte varnish should keep it well protected. And once that's done, this is the end result. So I'm really happy with how these turned out. I think if you just put in a bit of time and effort, you can get some really great thematic terrain pieces for your battles. So here is the amount of terrain I got from 4 boxes. So 2 U-shaped, 2 right-sided L's, 4 left-sided L's, and the square ones. And here they are set up. This is terrain layout 1. This is terrain layout 2. Now this calls for a bit of a different position on those smaller 5x10s, so I can easily just move it around. Now the other difference in some of these is they have extra left-sided L-shaped ruins, so I just replaced the right-sided ones with left-sided ones. So here's the next ones. You can see also I combine these with some scatter terrain for those little 4x6 and for the edges of the 5x10s, and you can add as much scatter terrain as possible. Here I'm just flipping the square 5x10s to go from L's left-sided to right-sided, so that's quite easy to do. And this is terrain layout 5. And you can notice I've also added some Perspex bases just to define the layout. Now, terrain layout 8 is the only one that's not really pretty much 100% right, because it needs 4 right-sided ruins, which I don't have, but I don't think it impacts it that much. You can also set it up for a thematic look, and it looks fantastic. So hopefully this was an inspiration for you to get out there and get some really good looking terrain to battle over. So thanks for watching.